Hi, I'm James Robinson, and this is my stock thought of the week. So as I make this video, it is September 13th, 2022. The market is getting hammered. The market's down 800 points because the Fed has just come up with new inflation numbers and everybody's scared of that. And I understand that the idea that inflation is increasing is going to cause the market to go down. I don't understand why the idea that there's inflation causes every single company in a market to go down. Surely there are companies that benefit from inflation. Either they benefit directly because they have pricing power, or they benefit directly because they're not going to be as infected as their competitors and thus are going to gain a competitive advantage. But none of that is ever considered by the market. The market simply says inflation goes up, stocks must go down. And the reason for that is because everybody looks at their stocks as a price and as a symbol. Nobody looks at the stocks as it's a company. It's going to be around for the next 20 years. I don't own the stock for what it's going to do today. I look at the stock for what it's going to do for the next long period of time. And whether you define long period of time as a quarter or a month or a year or 10 years is up to you. I try and look at it in the very long term. But even in the short term, if you're just looking at quarter to quarter, how much is an inflation report really going to affect the value of a company? First of all, it's backward looking, so it doesn't tell you what's going to happen in the future. It just tells you what's been happening in the recent past. And it doesn't also tell you how well your company is adjusting. If your company has significant pricing power and is able to raise their prices at or above the rate of inflation, inflation's irrelevant. So one of the tools that I've used is something that I learned from Warren Buffett. I don't look at my portfolio as a list of stocks. In fact, I don't look at it as a portfolio at all. I look at it as a mini conglomerate. So a conglomerate is a group of companies owned by a parent company, and those companies are pretty dissimilar. Berkshire Hathaway is obviously a conglomerate. Berkshire Hathaway owns stock in 48 companies, and then they own all of the stock of another 100 companies, and those companies are in tremendously different industries. So it's a conglomerate. Now, Warren Buffett doesn't worry about what's happening with Coke or what's happening with Dairy Queen. He wouldn't say, I'm going to sell my interest in Dairy Queen because inflation is up. He says, I like Dairy Queen as a company. In the long run, it's going to do fine. And in the short term, there'll be some bumps, but some of my stocks will do better in those bumps and some stocks will do worse. And in the aggregate, it'll do fine. So what we're going to do is talk today about how you convert looking at your portfolio of companies into looking at them as a conglomerate. And I think once you do that, it will give you some perspective and it will give you some peace that when you're looking in the market and you say, hey, my stock in Williams-Sonoma is down 4% today, to ask yourself, well, does Williams-Sonoma have 4% less stores? Do people need 4% less knives, less, furniture, whatever Williams-Sonoma is selling? I don't think that any of those things are true. It's just that the market says it is, and in the short term, it's right. But in the long term, I suspect Williams-Sonoma 5 years from now is going to sell more stuff than it does today. So what do I care about the fact that this inflationary report came out today? The truth is, I always look at what most people call a portfolio as what I call a virtual conglomerate. And I've actually taken the steps of calculating how many employees my virtual conglomerate really employs. So for the sake of conversation, if the company has 10,000 employees and I own 1/10,000th of the stock, I would calculate that I'm employing one employee. And I do that with lots of different categories with my stocks. And one of the reasons that I do that is when I'm looking at buying or selling a stock, I ask myself, does this purchase make my conglomerate better? And I'll go through what all this means over the next few slides. Another thing that's happening now that I'm starting to manage money for clients, clients have given me, invested money with me and really just transferred their portfolio over to me. And I think it would be really arrogant of me just to sell their stocks and to replace their portfolio with my own. And so what I'm doing instead is I'm going through their portfolio and just making sure they don't have anything in there that I've really missed. And then the second thing that I'm doing is I'm converting their portfolio into, again, what I call a conglomerate. And I'm comparing it to the conglomerate that I'm offering as a value investor to ensure that there's advantages there. And if there weren't, then maybe I shouldn't be managing these people money. Maybe they're doing a great job on their own. So I'm going to walk through that process with you as we go through this. And hopefully it'll be illuminating and maybe you do it with your own portfolio and see how you compare. So this is a client's actual portfolio. And now because it's a client and it's their private business, I'm not going to tell you who the companies are that they own. It doesn't matter. But I can tell you that I've just called them company A through P. The first thing I do is look at how many shares they own. I look at the price, and that tells me the value of their portfolio. So this particular client has a value of a portfolio of about $94,000. So that's obviously very, very straightforward. Now, there are all kinds of sources that I can do. I'm looking at company A here, and there are all kinds of sources that I can use that will tell you the revenue per share of the company. So if I know the name of the company and I know the revenue per share for the company, and I know how many shares the company owns, then my conglomerate has revenues equal to the number of shares times the revenue per share, right? Does that make sense? Okay, so for company A, we know that the revenue per share is $77.36. When we look down here, we see that company A's we own 25 shares of company A in our portfolio. So you multiply that number times 25 shares, $77.13 times $25, and you come up with revenue of $1,934. So my conglomerate receives the equivalent of $1,934 of gross revenue as a result of owning company A. Does that make sense? And then we look at company B and C and D and all the way through the list, and you can see that in the end, we have about $90,000 of revenue, which is the sum total of the revenue generated by all of the companies that we own. So having done that with revenues, we can find out earnings per share. So when you find out the earnings per share for these companies and we add all them up, we find out that this company this portfolio, the companies in this portfolio, our portion of that is about $4,176.61. So our company had a total aggregate revenue of $90,382. And from that, our company made $4,176. So that means that we had a profit of about 4% of revenues, which is not very good. It also means that we have an implied PE ratio. We can do the same thing with dividends per share. And when we add all those up, we find out this company has $2,361.37 of dividends combined for all of our shareholdings. That equates to a dividend yield of 2.51%. So we invested $94,000 in a bunch of stocks. Those stocks earned a profit of $4,176. That's our share of the company's profits. And our share of the dividends is $2,361.37. So the company had profits of 4.4% of gross revenues, and it had a dividend yield of 2.51%. Again, that's what our conglomerate is doing. We can also calculate the debt that we're taking on. So if we own a piece of a company with a ton of debt, there's a ton of risk associated with that, and we want to know that. If we're taking on a company that has very little debt, there's no risk associated with that, and we want to know that. We want companies, in theory, that have less debt versus more. Now, it's harder to find the debt per share. That's not as easy to find, but what you can find is the amount of debt and the number of shares. You do a little division, and you can come up with the number of debt per share. You multiply that times your number of shares, and that's how you come up with the total of debt that your conglomerate is responsible for, that your conglomerate has a piece of as a result of owning a piece of that company. So when you add all that up, the company has $18,000 in debt. So that works out to 19.31% of the value of the company is a debt obligation. So again, when you look at all this, you say, okay, the company has a value. The stock market value of our company is $94,000. Those companies have revenues attributable to our ownership of $90,000. They have profits attributable to our ownership of $4,176. We get a 2.31% dividend yield. The company has $18,000 worth of debt, which is 19% of the value of our purchase price of those stocks. So that's a little bit higher than we'd like to see. So having said all that, you can now go through and do the exact same thing with my portfolio that I'm going to do, or I can do that with my portfolio that I'm going to do. Now, in the past, I've always shared with you what my portfolio was, but now that I'm managing money, this is proprietary. This is how I make my money. So I'm not going to go into all the details of what these companies are. Many of them I've done videos on, and you'll be able to kind of assume what some of them are, but I'm not going to go into it. But again, what we can do is run through the exact same set of math. So my portfolio has a value of about $750,000. It has revenue per share of $687,000, so that's about 91.6%. Our profits are $81,000, which implies a PE ratio of 9.22%, so half the PE ratio of my client's little mini conglomerate. We have about 12% of our revenue turning into profit. That's about 3 times what my client's original portfolio had. I have a dividend yield of 4.17%, so about 150% of what my client had. And we have a debt value of 13.34%. So again, significantly less than our client had. So when you add all this up, I think it's pretty easy to say that Robinson Stocks has a portfolio which on paper appears to be a conglomerate, which appears to be a more desirable conglomerate than the existing conglomerate that my client had. One would hope that's the way it is. That's the way they've hired me. So let's take half a step back and think about this. If we're looking at it as a conglomerate and we say we own pieces of these companies, do we really care in the very short term what happens in the market? I don't think we do. I think once you start looking at it this way, you start saying, I'm not that concerned about what happens day to day. I own really good companies. In the aggregate, my companies have very good dividend yields. They have pretty high margins. They have a very low PE. They have very little debt. And so if the market gets soft for a while, it'll come back and I'll do great. Also, it gives me tools when I go to buy a new stock. If the new stock doesn't improve these numbers, if it makes these numbers worse, for example, if I buy a new stock and the PE goes up for my portfolio, then why am I doing that? I'm not saying that I wouldn't do it. I just need to have a reason to do it. I need to have a reason to replace company A with company B if I choose to do that. And I like having that sort of automatic braking system on me because very often the incentive is to keep trying to do things. You want to be always trying to figure out a way to improve. And sometimes you need to just say, relax, don't do anything. You need to have disincentives to act as an investor versus incentives to act. And I think this gives you a tool to do that. So kind of a short video today, but I just wanted to give you a sense for one of the things that I look at as I'm managing money, one of the things that I look at as I'm analyzing my companies, and just a way to look at your portfolio as something other than a list of stocks. Thank you for your time.